Let's move on to the business news on the programme now. Asian markets falling as investors really struggle to break out of a long-running volatile cycle, with optimism over the economic recovery playing off against those ongoing fears about inflation. As you can see, pretty mixed. Biggest drop on the Nikkei in Tokyo, biggest rise, though, on the Hang Seng in Hong Kong of nearly 1.5%. A little earlier, we spoke to market analyst at FXTM, Han Tan, and he was asked if we're expecting anything significant from the release of minutes from the US Federal Reserve's meeting back in April.
Expecting anything different? No, but that doesn't mean that investors cannot afford to let up. They have to remain vigilant, given how markets have grown more anxious about the U.S. inflation story. So we are going to see what the Fed's outlook is, because right now the Fed thinks that inflation spikes are likely to be transitory. How long is transitory exactly? What does that mean in the Fed's eyes? Perhaps we will find out more clues from the FOMC minutes later today.
Han Tan then from FXTM. Now, in a meeting here in Paris, leaders and heads of state of African and European nations have agreed to seek an additional $100 billion in funding to revive African economies decimated by coronavirus. Now, the so-called New Deal will see the money come in via the reallocation to African countries of some money which was initially meant to go to advanced economies. Claire Rush explains.
The coronavirus pandemic is an emergency for Africa. The words of French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday as he wrapped up the last day of a two-day summit on financing African economies battered by COVID-19.
L'objectif de ce sommet pour nous était double: apporter des réponses de court terme et lancer une dynamique qui puisse véritablement créer ce New Deal économique et stratégique avec le continent africain.
This so-called New Deal comes on the heels of proposals initially agreed upon by world finance chiefs last month. Among them, the extension of a debt servicing freeze and an increase of $650 billion in special drawing rights. Known as SDRs, the international reserve assets are issued by the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to the central banks of its member countries as an asset that can be easily exchanged for hard currency with another central bank. Of the $650 billion SDR increase, however, only $33 billion will be allocated to Africa, a far cry from the financial shortfall of nearly $300 billion caused by the pandemic. To help fill in that gap, some wealthy countries, including France and Portugal, say they're willing to redirect their SDRs to African nations, up to $100 billion worth. Another key proposal, lifting patents on coronavirus vaccines to allow for their manufacture on the continent.
Il n'y a pas assez de mobilisation de ce côté-là de la part de nos populations. C'est une certaine inquiétude qui est due au fait, à mon sens, que le vaccin vient d'ailleurs.
The summit's participants hope the initiatives will help the continent's economies recover from the pandemic, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The region's economy shrank by nearly 2% last year, its worst contraction on record.
Claire Rush there with the business news.